We've been reading Walden. We didn't read it, we just listened to it, which by Mackenzie was he's a pretty good reader, I think. He needed like an Irishman to read it, I think. Since Thoreau got along pretty well with the Irish, he admired the Irish in some way. He felt they were, but that's a big issue, and the Walden he talks about his Irish friends. Here's page 349, reading Walden. This is about reading Walden. Walden was born in face-to-face conversation with friends and neighbors who freely asked impertinent questions and expected honest answers in return. Remember how he just goes to the woods and then people keep asking him, why did you go there? What are you doing? So Walden is written to answer their questions. As Thoreau stood before them early in 1847, his house could authenticate his every word. Come and see. You see, he had the house to show them what he was doing. But by 1854, Walden was no longer. Of course, the pond was still there, but most of the trees were cut, and his house was gone. Nothing marked the site but a weedy cellar hole. If the meaning of his years there were to live on, Thoreau needed to recreate his performance as a book. Convert the material, place the wooden floored wood, reeking of wood smoke and damp wool, pine needles tracked underfoot, the mouse drawn on the door, into a space of words. His other difficulty was to locate his readers. So now he has to recreate it in thought and a book. Thoreau knew plenty of town scoffers sneered at him behind his back, but he also knew that dreamers and poor students like him too often lived in quiet desperation. Are we like dreamers and poor students? Why? We like Walden. Why aren't you sneering at him? To all the others, not just the scoffers, but the strong and valiant natures who relish things as they are, and who he asked only that, should they try on the coat that is Walden, they not stitch the seams, lest they ruin it for those whom it fits. A week, we're talking about the book A Week on the Merrimack River, imagines life flowing irretrievably down the river of time. But Walden imagines life lit by passion and pain into a single many-faceted diamond. Robert Frost was impressed by this. Quote, think of the success of a man's pulling himself together all under one word title. That is Walden. Yet, despite its order of timelessness, Walden insists on literal historical reality. It needs the rough edges. The railroads whistle, the woodchucks gnawing his beans, Zelpha muttering curses over her pod. This insistence on materiality reverberates through the ideational content of Walden, especially drawing our attention to how personal and social identities depend on material facts and actions. The long opening chapter, that's the one you like, we both like, and we like economy. Interesting that it's called economy. It's actually a early treat. It's actually somewhat minimalistic. Economy makes us feel like how building that house is rebuilding a self, literally from the ground up. But this time the choices would be made deliberately, quote, deliberately, unquote, with full consciousness of their cost. When Thoreau moves in on Independence Day, as the narrator tells us 3 times, we recall America itself was founded as a nation of citizens who did not inherit the conditions of their lives but built them. It's like the building of America. This is why this is a quintessential American book and a classic. Do you think it's a great American classic? After hearing Frederick Douglass indict the Declaration of Independence as a lie, Thoreau turned Douglass's anger towards his own moral outrage, his elders' contentedness to prosper commercially on the backs of slaves, rather than working to finish the promise of America's great revolution, gave the lie to their every ideal. Thoreau's anger and contempt made us squirm today. Can make us squirm. Do you squirm at all over his anger and contempt? When those who ride still ignore the many who are ridden upon, inexcusable in a democracy constituted as it is by the daily decisions made by every citizen. Do you think that some people should ride on others who ride still ignore the many who are ridden upon? Hence, emancipation must begin with self-examination. He believes in this examined life. So he did study classics at Harvard. What a man, quote, what a man thinks of himself, that is which determines, or rather indicates his fate, unquote. Or as St. Augustine wrote in his Confessions, quote, I was held back, not by the fetters put on me by someone else, but by the iron bondage of my own will, unquote. What Wilberforce, Thoreau asked, would emancipate the self? The original Walden put Thoreau front and center, building his own world, pounding nails, plowing beams, walking the rails to Concord, and accounting for every half penny. They had half pennies back then. Do you ever see a half penny? I'd like a half penny. A solid warm house, he proclaimed with a Yankee flourish, for $28.12 and a half. Top that. You think he had pride of pride of economy? Do you suffer from pride of economy? It's a story riddled with moral lessons piled on until even the most sympathetic reader tires. Do you ever get tired of his accounting for every little penny? I sometimes tire of his penny counting. But it is entitled economy, and he's a minimalist. Young Thoreau, yearning for truth, high on his soapbox, needling his elders for their follies, defending himself from their catcalls with his own implacable wit, and making them wince through their laughter. That was the book he put away in 1849 and did not publish. The Thoreau of 1852 was a very different man, chastened by failure and mellowed by family life. Had Walden prepared him to meet the challenges of Main Street? If not, his achievement there had been pure but limited. It meant one could attain virtue only by leaving society a utopia of one? The Thoreau who dusted off the old manuscript, hoping at last to make wholes of parts, could imagine himself as more than a preacher haranguing his audience. He could imagine himself as an agent of change. This required him to reorient his book. Nearly the entire second half was written not by the hermit at the pond, but by the walker on Main Street, brimful of discovery, the practical surveyor, training his moral compass on people and their doings. Do you think the second half is different than the first? We're going to get the second half. His new pages turned outward to what would later be called the environment. So the second half is like about the environment. Before he told us what he thought, now he would show us how he sees. How he sees. These chapters founded the genre of nature writing, But Thoreau did not understand nature as others existing outside the self or beyond the town boundaries. Do you see nature as outside of New York or within it? Is it just up in the park, or where is nature? Is nature as existing outside the self or beyond town borders? Instead, Thoreau understood nature as a higher truth, encompassing the self and society, a dynamic truth shot through with all the forms of life swirling around and collecting themselves into a whole, with Walden, not Thoreau, at the center. In these pages, Walden blossoms as a hologram graph of the planet and of one human life lived as a prism refracting the sunlight onto the page. Beautiful. To pivot from the old material to the new, from philosophy to poetry, Thoreau crafted a dramatic device that has cost him many readers. A lot of readers don't like him. Some don't like him. In Baker's Farm, he staged John Field, the impoverished Irish bogger who had sheltered him during a thunderstorm, as the embodiment of failure. The deserving victim of the narrator's aggression. See, but the failure is the narrator's as well. Thoreau staged himself as a pedantic meddler who hectors the family with a pile of proverbs, then turns away in disgust when the poor Irish immigrants gape at him, uncomprehending, instead of magically mutating on the spot into philosophers like himself. Do you think he tried to convert the Irish to philosophers? And they didn't change. Many have found Thoreau's ethnic slurs were unforgivable. Do you think he slurred the ethnic groups of the poor and the Irish? I don't think so. But the fields are the vehicle of a central metaphor. Even though that metaphor is problematic, the fields stand in for readers who, bogged down in old ways, make the same tragic mistake of assuming a better life means working harder to earn more money to buy more stuff, tea, coffee, and meat, thus buying into the very economy that feeds off slave labor and fueling the machine. Atropos fate, the destroyer of worlds and consumer of souls. Do you think they stand in as just a symbol of the rest of us? Do we spend a lot on tea, coffee, and meat? We don't buy meat. Anyways, that's the end of this section, part 1 of reading Walden. We are, in fact, reading Walden. So we're reading about the fact that we're reading Walden. Interesting analysis from the professor. Professor Laura Dassow Walls. Do you think she's a good professor of American English literature?